certainly have fears that there is a serial killer at loose in Perth.
Sarah Spears, Jane Rimmer, Kira Glennon.
And every time you saw a young girl walking by, you think, oh God, is she going to be the next victim?
Now, one man stands accused.
If police are right and Edwards is the Claremont serial killer, he's been hiding in plain sight for 20 years.
The night Jane Rimmer disappeared, CCTV cameras were in the Claremont area recording. Today in court, grainy vision of the 23-year-old was shown publicly for the first time. This is Claremont in Conversation. I'm Natalie Bonjolo, and joining me for day 12 of the trial, we have Alison Van in studio.
Hello.
And calling in from Supreme Court, Tim Clark. Okay, so tell us, when did this vision that we haven't seen before of Jane Rimmer surface?
That popped up very late in the day. Some of it we'd seen before because the prosecutor indicated on the first day that she would be showing a vision of Jane Rimmer's last movements. But we did see very, very clear vision today of Jane walking between the two popular night spots of Club Bayview and Continental. They tended to walk between the two, the partygoers,
yes,
when they went to Claremont. And you can see her walking backwards and forwards, and very, very clear vision that we hadn't seen before, have we, Tim?
No, that's right. And it was basically the vision that was scooped up by the detectives back in the day after Jane went missing. Obviously, I mean, that's when, really macro sort of, went from sort of 10 miles an hour to 1,000 miles an hour, and they were looking for every investigative lead they could. And obviously, CCTV is an obvious option, and so that's what that they've scooped it all up, and here we are again, as we mentioned so many times, 23 years later, seeing it in public for the first time, and as Ali says, it was very clear vision, given the the sort of the how long ago it was, and the quality of cameras back in the day. It was clear. Particularly, there was one very clear shot of Jane coming down the stairs at the Continental Hotel. She even appeared to sort of trip as she got to the bottom, but you could see her hair, you could see what she was wearing, you could see the expression on her face, and in almost all the clips, the expression on her face was one of delight, smiling, socialising, eyes wide, greeting friends, just an absolutely typical night out until it all went horribly wrong, obviously.
Because we never saw it. Swung back to a spot where she was standing, and the next time they said that these cameras were on a loop. I think it was something like 13 seconds between them, because they're mainly for troublemakers. And they had up to 8 cameras. They had 4 at the Continental and 4 at the Club Bayview, up to 8. And when they swung back to where she was standing, she'd gone.
Yeah.
So they didn't help in finding that very last minute when she disappeared.
Yeah, that really is one of those sliding door moments. So as Ali explained, there were 4 different cameras, and they were on a 13-second cycle. So one would record for 13 seconds, and then it would flick to the next one, and then flick to the next one, and then flick back again. And it was actually footage that wasn't shown in court this afternoon, but shown during the opening, and we'll get to it probably first thing tomorrow, where you see Jane sort of leaving, her friends going to get a taxi. She decides to wait outside the hotel on her own, and then we get into that cycle, and at the start of the cycle she's there, and then by the time it comes back again in those 13-second blocks, she's gone. And I mean, how different everything could have been if one of those 13 cycles had maybe captured the car or the person or whatever. We don't know, and that's why we're here. That had taken her away.
I guess the people who don't know the area, if we can just paint you a little bit of a picture. So the Continental is on the corner of this very popular street and a very popular night spot, and then you walk, I don't know, Ali, maybe 200 metres up the road.
And you walk to the next one. It's a very neighbourhood.
Yes, it's a very, and then you would turn into this little side street, and that's where Club Bayview was, and, partygoers would sort of beat a path from one to the other, and when the Conti would shut, you would go to Club Bayview just around the corner, a few hundred metres away, and there's an entrance there, and a door, and there's a taxi rank outside, and then you would walk up the stairs to the first level, and that's where everyone was. So that's kind of how close we're talking. And these security cameras are positioned outside both of these two clubs.
Really for crowd control and troublemakers, because as Claremont, as you know, up until these murders took place, was regarded as a very, very affluent, very safe, very neighbourhood place where everybody seemed to know each other. The kids were all from the local schools or the universities. Yes. You'd go along and they'd meet friends there, and that's what she was doing, meeting groups of friends, go to the other place, they'd group another friend, they'd walk backwards and forwards till 2 or 3 in the morning.
Yes, it was packed. You really are talking about the heyday back then. There was,
the incidental shots we saw today, Nat, of inside the pub, Jane coming down the stairs, and then to the right of the stairs was the bottom floor, and it was absolutely packed. There was literally no room to move, and this is why these murders had such an effect, because this bustling, buzzing sort of entertainment precinct in the upper sort of middle class to upper class area of Perth went from being the place to be every Friday, Saturday and Sunday night, and sometimes in the week. Yes. And you remember, this was in the middle of winter when Jane went missing, not at the height of Australia Day when Sarah went missing, or later when Kira went missing. And it went from being the place to be basically, no one wanted to go. Or if you did
scared,
go, if you did go, as you've said many times, Ali, you'd look over your shoulder. You'd have to go in groups of 3 or 4, and you certainly wouldn't stay out on your own after midnight.
And with the vision that you saw, I mean, there is that vision that people may recall that over the years we have seen. It was vision that police did release back in 1996.
They did and they didn't. This is what, that very first photograph that they showed Jane talking to this random guy.
Yes.
I remember that caused an uproar because people had said, we have never seen this before. And it was only when the cold case detectives took over and had another review and started to compile the vision that this vision was known. But we have never, we've seen a few clips, but that very first photograph, a black and white grainy shot of Jane talking to a random guy, I remember everybody said, why hasn't this been released before?
Yeah. And of course now we know they had so much more.
Yeah.
They did, and it's exactly what the conversation we were having with Damien yesterday about that choice that obviously detectives felt they had to make at the time, and then as the investigation went on and on and on, that choice between keeping their, as they saw it, investigative advantage of what they knew and what they didn't want suspects to know, and also the other side of the coin is releasing it to possibly elicit more information. And as Ali said, it was years after Jane went missing when this was released, and certainly nothing like the vision, the length and quality of vision that we've seen today. There was one fleeting image of Jane talking to this stranger outside the club, in the moments before she went missing, and obviously that was they thought they had a suspect there. You would assume. But I've got to point out that there's no suggestion that man in that footage was Mr. Edwards. It hasn't been suggested in court and hasn't at any stage. And so obviously that was one investigative pathway that didn't bear fruit.
So just for people who haven't maybe seen that particular footage before, can you just describe it for us? We've got Jane, she's outside, she's talking to someone she's just bumped into.
That's right. Yeah, she's talking to the fellow outside the Continental Hotel. She moves around a bit. She walks up and down the sidewalk like a lot of them do, and then she wanders off, and then it's picked up as she walks back to Club Bayview. In fact, the Club Bayview vision is much clearer. Right. And unfortunately, you can only see the bottom of her at the screen, but that is like perfectly clear. The other stuff is a bit grainy. I wouldn't be able to identify my next door neighbour from some of those pictures. It was very grainy. Yeah. But the Club Bayview stuff was clear as a bell. Absolutely.
So what do we see exactly in that vision from the Club Bayview cameras?
Just talking with friends, having a happy time, walking outside Club Bayview, and then she seemed to be heading back towards they tended to wander like Bayview Terrace itself was like a party scene.
Yes.
Very little traffic, and again, as I said, everyone felt safe there. Everyone knew everyone.
How many minutes of vision was shown in court today, and how much of it was Jane in that vision?
I'd say upwards of 20 now, maybe. Well, yeah, about that. I would say. And Jane was in a lot of it, and sort of highlighted for the court and for Justice Hall to know what he was looking at. But I mean, as Ali said, in some of it, it was clear as a bell who you were looking at. Mm-hmm. There was also some extensive footage of one of Jane's friends that she was with on the night as well, taken to basically put the timeline together of where the group had been in the hotel, and there's more to come tomorrow. Ms. Barbagallo said that there's at least another 12 minutes of footage to show first thing tomorrow.
We may not. Will the public?
Jane.
Will the public get to see it? Do you think?
Well, that's the question. So I know certainly myself, other media organisations did put in an application for some of that vision to be released, but because it was shown very late in the day, that won't be now considered by Justice Hall until tomorrow. Mm-hmm. I've got to say, Justice Hall has been very, very considerate of the family.
Yeah.
Yes. That's basically been his number one priority.
Yes.
Or the first thing and last thing on his mind when he's been considering exhibits is how is this going to affect the family. So
absolutely.
I would, having sat here now for sort of coming up to 3 weeks, I would be doubtful that he would release it, to be honest, for that exact reason. We're going to do our jobs and apply to see if we can get some or maybe just snippets of it, just to show those that aren't in court, what Jane's movements were. But obviously. That's entirely up to the Justice Hall, and we'll abide by any ruling he comes down with.
It was a very hushed court too when they were playing this.
Absolutely,
yes.
Yeah, it was. It's there's been a lot of still images and documents. It's been a sort of quite a document-heavy trial so far. But whenever there's been moving vision, or particularly that audio of Sarah on the first day, and then late last week, you really could hear a pin drop then when they're showing it, because everyone is absolutely, just
totally riveted to it,
captured by it, because it's never been seen before. Vision of crimes and women that here in Western Australia, you feel like you almost know them in a certain aspect, but of course, we didn't. We only know them through, unfortunately, what's happened to them.
Was Jane's mum, Jenny, in court today?
No, she hasn't been here since day one of the trial. She's quite frail. She's quite infirm. She only managed to sort of stay till the lunchtime of day one of the trial. But she did put an appearance in. I think sort of through police who've been dealing with her family. I think she felt it was very important for her to be there. Jane's brother obviously gave evidence late last week as well. But no, Jenny wasn't there.
Neither were any of the family of the others either, were they?
No. It was an in and out day of court for a lot of reasons today, and I don't think any of the families of the murder victims were there. No.
And what about Bradley Edwards? Was he also intently watching the videos today?
Yes, he was taking notes, using his own little screen, as we've alluded to before. He's got one. He's got one in the dock himself that he can concentrate and doesn't have to squint across the courtroom like some of us do. And so he was looking and watching quite intently, as pretty much everyone in court was.
So if the last shots that you saw today of Jane in this video, what time of the night was that?
Around, I think they gave the times, didn't they? Although they gave the times of the cameras.
To midnight, I think.
20, and then...
So it spanned, the vision spanned from about 20 to midnight, leading up to basically a few minutes before midnight.
Right.
And then the crucial time tomorrow that we'll come to is 4 minutes after midnight, which is the last footage that we saw of Jane that we've already spoken about, that 13-second cycle. And then it's basically 12:04. She's gone.
Now, obviously, before Jane disappeared, we go back to Sarah, which was at the start of 1996. And this morning, that's where you started in court, right? You started with the night Sarah disappeared?
We started with another witness who was woken up by these three really loud, she said, disturbing, distressing screams. And we've already heard two other witnesses describe these three, and I think the three screams came straight after each other. They were described as blood-curdling, never to be forgotten once you heard them. And we had another witness today, a young woman who was woken up by those screams. She went out onto the balcony, but she couldn't see anybody. She thought they were coming. Mosman Park is a riverside suburb. She thought they were coming from the river end of Mosman Park near a college called Iona Presentation College. But that was about as far as she could go. The defence lawyer challenged her on what nights, because they'd both been out, she and her husband, both nights of that long weekend, drinking quite heavily. But she said no, she woke up to those screams. She couldn't wake her husband up, but she heard them.
So what was the confusion with her testimony?
Well, I think there was some. She explained in court that she'd been, or her and her husband, then husband, had been out 2 nights in a row over that long weekend. Celebrating as we all do on Australia Day weekend here, and there was some confusion about which social event she'd attended on which night. And so in some of her statements or some of her recollections to police, she'd thought that she'd attended a certain party on the Friday night when she said she heard the screams, when in fact that party had been on the Saturday night.
Right.
And so there was some timeline confusion. But under quite sort of heavy questioning, I've got to say, by Mr. Jovich, she stuck to her guns and said, no, I was never confused about when I heard the screams. I always thought I heard the screams on the Friday, but it was which party I attended on the Friday or the Saturday that I was confused about. And so, and as Ali said, it's quite compelling evidence, this scream evidence we've heard. We've now heard, as she said, three different people on 3 different spots surrounding this phone box where the prosecution are going to triangulate the screams to say that that's where they think they came from. That's where they think Sarah was either dropped off or first attacked at that, or very near that phone box. And I plotted them on a map today, actually, and they're basically in a perfect triangle. These 3 people or persons that have heard these screams at almost virtually exactly the same time, 2:30 in the morning. They've all described them as, not just not like a cat or not like a girly girl scream. This was a proper, horrific, disturbing scream that has now woken basically 3 independent people on 3 different points of the Mosman Park map, which would suggest that something very untoward was occurring.
And Paul Jovich is quite strong when it comes to his questioning of this. Is it very? How does it play out? Is it very calm and methodical? Is it tense when he is?
No, he's fairly relaxed. Yeah, he just challenges them on things that he can, discrepancies in perhaps their earlier statements, which he keeps reminding them, wasn't your memory much fresher back then,
right,
months after the statement was taken, rather than 20 years on. So that's what he keeps hammering. And the girl today, she really wasn't quite sure whether it was a Friday or Saturday, but she did remember the screams, and she said, what does it matter? I remember those screams.
And she describes them as the other witnesses have described them.
Oh.
Yeah, horrific, she called them, horrific, and exactly the same as one of the other witnesses. 3 very piercing, very high-pitched, obviously female screams, directly one after the other, and then nothing.
And did you say, did she report this at the time?
A few days later, she rang Crime Stoppers, which is the sort of anonymous tip line that you can ring in Australia for any incident that you want the police to know about, but you don't necessarily want to call the police, if you know what I mean. Yep. She rang a few days later and reported it, and reported exactly what she basically reported in court today. And that was important because that was obviously the first and most contemporaneous report she made. And in that, she said, I heard them at 3 a.m. on Saturday morning, which is the hours from Friday, Australia Day, into Saturday, when we know that Sarah was last seen alive.
Today there was more talk about the Telstra cars, and you heard from some more Telstra technicians. Was there any additional information there that was fresh?
You were awake for that, Ali, were you? It was quite dry, that evidence. It was quite hard going.
Barely awake.
Yeah, but necessary. As I say, flippant, but it was heavy going. So this was a gentleman who'd worked for Telstra since 1972. Can you believe? I was born in 1972. So that shows you how long his career was. And he'd gone from technicians working in PABX systems, which Mr. Edwards worked to, into sort of an operational role. And he was basically in charge of the fleet of Telstra cars, and so he explained how the fleet worked and how operatives and employees could get access to fleet cars, but they weren't supposed to just take the keys and drive. And he installed a new sort of system whereby everyone knew which employee had which car and when. And then he was also asked about Telstra uniforms, which we've also sort of gone over quite methodically already. But he was one of the two witnesses that actually produced a pair of the Telstra uniform from the mid-90s, which we've already explained is going to become really important when it comes to the fibre evidence, because they say that fibres found on Jane and on Kira and on the rape victim from Karrakatta all match the blue fibres that were only worn and could only have been worn by Telstra employees.
I think the prosecutions are not missing much, are they? They're going over absolutely every shred of paper trail. I think they're trying to cover everything that could be possibly challenged, or isn't that seems to be the way? Like even the judge came at one stage. He said, "What, you want me to look at something that doesn't show anything? And do you want me to read this? Do I really have to read this?" House magazine showing the blue, uniforms that they wore and things like that. It's just. Yeah.
Minute detail.
Absolutely. You've got a big team of prosecutors working in there. What, you've got up to 11 prosecution and then only about 4 or 5 defence, if the most. Yeah.
And does it seem to you that Paul Jovich is really honing in on details more now and really picking up on any little inconsistencies in testimony?
He's not.
Yeah, well, he's certainly trying to. And that's his job. I mean,
point out discrepancies.
Yeah, absolutely. And those, the fibres are going to be important, as we've said. I mean, there wasn't really much he could punch a hole in today. I mean, this chap had these trousers. And they even came up, going into Ali's point about detail, that they came up with the order form that this gentleman had used, or that they will say that he used to order these particular pair of pants, and so that they can show what time of his career. It was basically, I think, 97 that he'd ordered them, to show that, yes, well, these are the exact same types of pants that Mr. Edwards would have been wearing at the time, and they were ordered from the same place, and they ordered in the same way. So, they're being very thorough with the stuff that they're going to need to be thorough with. And as I said before, we're just getting a taste of what it's going to become when it gets down to DNA and fibres and experts, because that is particularly detailed evidence anyway, and they're being detailed with these so-called civilian witnesses. So it is going to be intricate detail when it really does get down to the forensics.
Well, I guess it shows us why this trial is going to take as long as it is going to take. There is so much to get through. Okay, well, we just have time for a couple of questions that have come through from listeners. Some of you would like to know if court is sitting over Christmas, and I think our understanding, Tim, to correct me if I'm wrong, that court will break from Monday the 23rd of December to Friday the 4th of January, which means the trial will resume on Monday the 6th of Jan. Is that your understanding?
That's the understanding as it stands. Justice Hall did some sort of pre-trial programming, and that was his initial thought. That will be done for various reasons. Obviously, you can't sit on Christmas Day. There's a whole infrastructure that goes around getting courts up, including security and getting Mr. Edwards from prison. There's also witness availability as well. I mean, you're going to be very unlikely to get a witness wanted to come in on Boxing Day. So yes, but it's a much shorter break than would be usual. Courts in Western Australia, in Perth, in the CBD, usually break from that sort of last Friday before Christmas. They'll usually have a month off. You usually come back sort of later in January. So Justice Hall has made it very clear that he wants the trial to continue when it can, and so they're the dates we're all working towards so far.
Yeah, and just another point for our listeners from overseas. A few of you have asked us about the legal drinking age in Western Australia. So obviously in the United States it's 21, but here in Australia it's 18, which is why some of the younger people are in the bars and clubs and pubs, and it was pretty lax back then as well compared to what it is today. And just finally, Tim, I'm going to ask you if you can cast your mind back. There's been a couple of questions about the gas bill, and I think this is around the time that Edward's marriage was unravelling. Can you just recap the gas bill situation and what the significance was?
Yeah, so that was basically a timeline question, and it also goes to the motive, the emotional upset motive that we've talked about. So very briefly recap that. Prosecutors say there were certain points in Mr. Edwards' personal life that correlated with the murders, and they say that was when his private life was in turmoil, basically. And one of those was the news of the pregnancy between the lover and his first wife. Yep. That she pinpointed that at the time quite early in her pregnancy. She said she didn't think she was showing. It was done on a phone. It was done over the phone, and it was done at the particular address that she'd moved into with her lover. But the defence, pointed out, well, the address that you thought that you'd relayed that news from, you can't have been living there at that time because we have a gas bill or an Alinta gas record to show that the gas wasn't turned on at that address until the September, which obviously completely puts out of whack the timeline. Yes. When Jane went missing and was murdered in the June. So that was the significance of it. It turns out, as the third wheel, as we labelled him late last week, was giving his evidence, it transpired that the wife's evidence might have actually got her timeline wrong in terms of where they were living at the time, because they moved out and they moved it. So there were several addresses that they moved into after the marriage breakdown. She first moved in with her parents, and then there was another address, and then there was another address. And so it turned out, as the third wheel was giving evidence, he basically had his timeline better in place than she did. So, as Damien alluded to, initially that looked like it could be a really good point of contention for the prosecution, but as it turned out, it was basically the first wife's sort of part of her vague evidence about where she was actually living at the time, and so I don't think that's now going to become a huge pressure point for the defence, right, as the motive arguments continue.
I mean, as we've discussed, when you're asking people to cast their memories back decades, it is really difficult to come up with these details.
Oh, well, we certainly can. I mean, Ali's memories probably stretches back a bit further than mine, but
thank you, Tim.
Maybe it's better in some parts than mine as well, because I was one of those teenagers that was drinking at 18 and maybe a little bit before.
With my sons.
I wasn't.
No, of course you weren't.
Of course I weren't. All right, well, thank you both so much again for your time today and all the hard work you're doing in court. Thanks, listeners, for getting in touch with us. We're love the feedback, so please do email us with any other questions or any feedback you have whatsoever. So I guess tomorrow we'll hear more on the video, which will be
see more
released
video,
and
yes,
see more
I
of the
think so.
video. So you'll relay to us what you've seen there, and thanks to you both. And we will be back tomorrow for Day 13's podcast, and we hope you can join us then.
This podcast was hosted by Natalie Bongiorlo, produced by Kate Ryan and Alicia Preedy, and recorded in the studios of 7 West Media. Audio files were provided from the archives of the 7 Network and the West Australian. Sign up for daily emails and all the latest on the Claremont trial at thewest.com.au.
Enjoying this podcast? If the story behind the headline matters to you, then you can count on thewest.com.au to deliver. For more on Claremont the trial, follow the live blog, watch the nightly news updates, and sign up for daily email updates at thewest.com.au. Subscribe now for just $1 a day at thewest.com.au.